Stalin felt the room freeze the moment the operator burst in, breath unsteady, fingers clutching a fresh telegram from the Far East. The paper trembled as it reached his desk. Stalin unfolded it slowly, expecting routine updates. Nothing more. But the first line struck him like a silent blow. Japan was collapsing. He read it again, slower this time, searching for an error, a missing character, a broken code. His expression barely moved, yet the tightening of his eyes revealed the fracture of certainty. Soviet intelligence had warned of months of resistance, perhaps longer, a grinding struggle across mountains and fortified cities. Instead, the enemy seemed to be falling under its own weight. For a moment, even the clocks in the office felt muted, as if history itself hesitated. Stalin lowered the telegram, not speaking, not breathing, aware that this single message would redraw the shape of tomorrow. And in that pause, a new and darker calculation quietly began inside. Midnight settled heavily over the Kremlin war room, where cigarette smoke clung to the ceiling like a second, suffocating fog. Dim lamps cast long shadows across tables crowded with maps, casualty reports, and half-finished strategies. Generals stood in uneasy clusters, their faces drawn from exhaustion and the weight of too many uncertain nights. When Stalin finally entered, he moved with a slow, deliberate heaviness that silenced the room instantly. Every officer rose, posture rigid, eyes lowered, waiting for a signal that never came. No one could tell whether the telegram he carried was triumph, disaster, or a carefully laid snare. Whispers slipped through the smoke. "It's too fast. Something's wrong." The tension pressed against the walls, as if the room itself feared speaking out of turn. Stalin reached the central table, laid the message beside the maps, and let his silence settle like ice. He listened to nothing and no one, forcing every man present to hold his breath. In that stillness, the imbalance of power became unmistakable. Whatever truth the night held, it would be Stalin's interpretation, not theirs, that determined how he would confront Japan's unraveling. The collision was set. Reports spread across the table like fresh cracks in a frozen lake. One general stepped forward, voice tight, announcing that multiple Japanese cities were collapsing almost simultaneously, their defensive lines folding with a speed no one had predicted. Another added that entire regiments were surrendering without prolonged resistance, their officers abandoning posts or sending desperate, fragmented signals back to Tokyo. The room absorbed each sentence in slow motion, as if time itself strained to keep pace with the unraveling. Stalin didn't move. He simply stared at the documents, absorbing the impossible. "Morale in Tokyo," the general continued, "was breaking like glass under a hammer. Cabinet members argued in panic, military commands contradicted one another, and the emperor's advisors were losing control of the narrative." Still, Stalin remained silent. Yet the silence was louder than any reaction. It revealed the fracture in his expectations, months of brutal campaigning replaced by a collapse he hadn't ordered, influenced, or anticipated. For a long moment, he let the weight of it settle, realizing that the Red Army might never fight the long, grinding battles they had meticulously prepared for. Finally, he leaned forward, eyes narrowing with a new, colder understanding. "So, it begins earlier than planned." The first shock had passed. First, a different calculation was awakening. Stalin lifted his gaze from the reports with a sharpness that cut through the smoke-filled room. He dismissed the intelligence with a single, clipped order. These updates meant nothing until they were confirmed by Soviet eyes, not American ones. He demanded verification from every channel: agents in Manchuria, informants in Korea, naval contacts near Hokkaido. "Not once," he said, voice low but icy. "Twice." The generals exchanged uneasy glances. Communications from the Far East were already strained. Lines flickered, messages arrived incomplete, and regional commanders were overwhelmed by the sudden chaos unfolding across Japanese territories. But Stalin's distrust overpowered logistical reality. The Americans knew something, he insisted, something they weren't sharing, and he refused to let Moscow be blindsided by Washington's version of events. Voices rose as officers argued over timetables, signal delays, and the worsening storm of conflicting reports. The pressure in the room thickened. Denial wasn't calm. It was explosive, a collision of paranoia and geopolitical instinct. Stalin cut through the noise with a forceful demand for silence. His stare pinned every man in place, leaving no room for doubt or objection. He leaned over the map, tracing Japan's outline as if feeling the tremor of collapse beneath his fingertips. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he whispered the line that froze the room. "If Tokyo falls today, the world changes tomorrow." The confirmation arrived in fragmented bursts, but it was enough. Japan's collapse was real, undeniable, and accelerating with every passing hour. The moment Stalin absorbed this truth, the denial vanished, replaced by a cold, methodical clarity. He straightened the papers before him, not out of habit, but to mark the transition from uncertainty to strategy. Orders were rewritten on the spot. Offensives in Manchuria were to advance faster, pushing deeper before American forces could reposition. Naval units were instructed to shift towards Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands, seizing key footholds before any ceasefire froze the map. Stalin spoke sparingly, but each word carried the weight of intent. Every minute of Japan's unraveling was a minute of Soviet opportunity, and he would not waste a second. Generals leaned in as he outlined his reasoning, tracing the entire Asian theater with deliberate precision. Railway lines, ports, resource hubs, everything became part of a rapid calculation designed to shape the post-war order. He paused only once, tapping a finger against the map, voice dropping to a thoughtful murmur. "Asia will define the next century." The room fell silent, absorbing the meaning behind the phrase. This was no longer reaction, it was takeover. Stalin's mind raced ahead of the front lines, envisioning borders that didn't yet exist and alliances that would force the world to bend. The emotional tone shifted from shock to momentum, the pacing tightening as every officer recognized that history was being rewritten in real time. And Stalin intended to hold the pen. The next message arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, beneath the flood of battlefield updates. But its contents struck deeper than any report of collapsing armies. Stalin read the line twice, then a third time, the words sinking into him with a cold, unfamiliar weight. Japan had not broken solely under Soviet pressure. It had been shattered by something else. An American weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. A bomb capable of erasing a city in a single instant. The realization hit harder than Japan's sudden collapse itself. This was power measured not in divisions or artillery, but in science that leapt beyond the boundaries of conventional war. Stalin's face darkened, his silence stretching long enough to unsettle even the most hardened generals. He understood immediately what this meant. The balance of the post-war world had tilted violently, and the Soviets were no longer standing on even ground. Fear flickered first, followed by a sharp stab of envy, and then the deeper tremor of strategic panic he would never admit aloud. The Americans had unveiled a new era without warning. Stalin lowered the telegram slowly, his mind already racing through possibilities he dared not speak. A new shadow had fallen across tomorrow. The final message reached the Kremlin just after dawn, its tone unmistakably different from the frantic reports of the night before. Tokyo had accepted the terms. The war, at least on paper, was ending. Stalin leaned back in his chair, not in relief, but in quiet calculation. Around him, generals exhaled, some with visible exhaustion, others with cautious optimism. Yet Stalin's gaze remained fixed on the map before him, tracing borders that were already beginning to harden under American influence. Japan would fall under Allied control. The United States now possessed a weapon that could unmake entire nations, and Asia, once a field of opportunity, was shifting beyond his immediate reach. The room waited for words of victory, but none came. Instead, Stalin spoke softly, almost reflective, delivering a line that chilled every man present. The war is over, but the next struggle begins tonight. A new horizon was forming. In the quiet that followed Japan's surrender, the world imagined peace settling at last. But inside the Kremlin, a different truth was taking shape. Stalin's reaction that night became the blueprint for the Soviet posture in the decades to come. His realization that America possessed a weapon beyond comprehension pushed the USSR toward an uncompromising pursuit of its own nuclear program. His sudden awareness of shifting power in Asia guided Soviet involvement in Korea, deepened support for revolutionary movements in China, and hardened his resolve to carve influence wherever opportunity remained. What seemed like the end of a global conflict was, in Stalin's mind, the opening move of a larger and more dangerous contest. From that single night, a new geopolitical architecture emerged. Two visions of power, two ideologies, and two nations locked into a rivalry that would shape almost every major event of the next 45 years. The fall of Japan did not simply close a chapter. It split the world into opposing spheres, each watching the other with suspicion sharpened by unimaginable destructive potential. As the camera pulls back, the message becomes unmistakable. Stalin didn't merely observe history turning. With calculated intent, he pushed it toward the shadowed path that followed.